What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here, and today we are going to discuss updating Sabine for Shadows of the Galaxy. I'm going to go over some updated versions of all three of the major colors of Sabine, so that would be Sabine Red, Sabine Green, and Sabine Yellow, and talk through some of the changes that I've made, what I think some of the new cards have to offer, and how I think further Sabine development will look in set 2. So yeah, let's get right into it. So Sabine Wren was the standout aggro leader in set 1. So Sabine was arguably the most successful overall leader by some metrics. Boba Fett did better in others. I think if you're talking about competitive tournament results, Boba did have stronger results than Sabine, but from some of the data from large numbers of games and so on, Sabine might have had a higher overall win rate than Boba, and even in some of the more league play type environments and so on, Sabine might have performed better, but Boba was at the very least more represented, and I believe had more wins in the Store Showdown season as well. Sabine deployed faster than any other leader in the game at the time that she was released. There were no other leaders that deployed on 4 resources. Both her leader and unit side did direct damage to the enemy base. This was usually paired with For a Cause I Believe In to allow for substantial reach, where even if a more control-oriented deck was able to stabilize, you were still able to potentially get them without having units on the board. And this is something that was relatively unique, and I think was a major part of Sabine's success. So, you'd play against like a green Boba deck. I had a lot of games against green Boba where, I would start out, I would be doing some damage. They would get their Boba flip turn. They would get a bunch of results. They would quickly clear the board. But, if I had already done, if the board is cleared, but I've already done 17 or 18 damage, and I play a For a Cause I Believe In or two, use Sabine's ability, that could be a win for the Sabine player, when a lot of other decks would sort of be done at that point. So I think that this formula was very successful, and yellow Sabine, double red Sabine, and green Sabine all worked pretty well. I think they had different strengths and weaknesses. Green Sabine was the most popular, at least early on. It was also the cheapest version to build. I personally felt that yellow Sabine was maybe a stronger all-comers deck towards the end of the Spark of Rebellion meta, and that if you thought there was going to be a fair amount of control that you were going to run into, double red in particular seemed like the way to go. But that's just my opinion. I know some people were big supporters of Sabine Green right up to the end. And now Shadows of the Galaxy has offered some more options. So first we're going to discuss some options that are good for all versions of Sabine here. So Cassian and/or Rebellions are built on hope. This card is just... this is a really, really, really good card. It's kind of crazy that this was printed. It's kind of crazy that this was uncommon. So 3 for a 3/5 is above the curve, or at least it was. Now it's more available than it was previously. But Cassian combines excellent stats with a really good ability. So 3 for 3/5 gets around a lot of early things that would otherwise be problems. So for instance, an opponent cannot ambush Cassian with a 4 strength ambush unit. So if you play a 3 cost 3/4, next turn there are a few options that can ambush in, like the modded cohort, for instance, or another example, I believe Forlom would also be a threat at that point. But Cassian at 3/5 is immune to that. Smuggle means that you can use him for, you can use this to gain card advantage, because Smuggle more or less doesn't cost a card. He does cost more when played with Smuggle, but when played using Smuggle, he comes into play ready, which is really good because it means that he can put more pressure on your opponent and potentially do immediate damage. So if your opponent uses all their resources to wipe your board, you can play Cassian from the resource zone and still put some pressure on that same turn that you're playing him, which I think is really good. He is Rebel traded, and he has the heroism aspect, which means that he works with For a Cause I Believe In, and he works with a lot of the existing synergy cards like Fleet Lieutenant, Medal Ceremony, that sort of thing. So overall, I think he's a really good card for Rebel aggro decks. I think he's basically an auto-include for all Sabine versions. I don't really think it needs a ton of deliberation. And the card is also luckily not even that difficult to get because it is an uncommon, so it's not as if this is a pricey legendary that you need to buy. I think Cassian is maybe my first stop for improving almost any pre-Spark of Rebellion Sabine build. So Next, we're going to discuss Daring Raid. This is another card that's been a real standout. It's a 1-cost aggression event, deal 2 damage to a unit or base. So this is an excellent direct damage event. Because it can hit both units and bases, it has a lot of flexibility. So one thing you can do with this card is get rid of an annoying unit that's causing you some problems if it has low HP, or, potentially you can use this to knock off a shield. If you're playing double red, you can use this with Tarkin Town to clear out a unit that has as much as 5 health. 1 cost for 2 damage is a really good rate in this game. It's card inefficient to a degree because it's a relatively small effect to spend a card on, but the damage can both extend Sabine's reach and clear out those units. If the opponent's stabilized, you can be just playing this on their base. If you need this to defeat a unit, even a leader, you have it there. I would say the main downside of this card is that it doesn't work with For a Cause I Believe In, because it is not heroism, but I think it's strong enough to bring anyway, and I would personally recommend including it in almost any Sabine Wren deck at this point. I think it's just a really good card, and the key thing there is, unlike some of the other burn cards that we've seen in the game, Daring Raid has the flexibility to be played on bases as well as units, and that really means a lot. Okay. Next up, we're going to discuss the Dark Saber. So this one's a little controversial. The Dark Saber is a 4-cost upgrade that gives +4/+3. If you play it on a Mandalorian unit, it ignores the aspect penalty. Sabine herself is a Mandalorian, so you can play the Darksaber on her, even if you're not running Sabine Green. So any version of Sabine can play this if they're going to play it on Sabine or Unit Sabine or a few other units they might be playing. And the attached unit gains on attack, give an experience token to each other friendly Mandalorian unit. So I think it's important to note that the on attack ability generally does nothing in a Sabine deck. I think I've had it go off once or twice when I was testing with Darksaber. It's very unreliable. It's not the main purpose. The main purpose of this card is it costs 4, which is the same amount that you need to deploy Sabine, and you're just going to use this to buff Sabine and attack the enemy base. And it's kind of a risky card against exhaust effects. So like if you deploy Sabine and then play the Darksaber on her and the opponent hits you with No Good to Me Dead, that's not where you want to be. It hurts For a Cause I Believe In because it's not heroic, and against upgrade removal it can be really bad. To some degree you can get around this through sequencing. So on the turn that you deploy Sabine, you're likely going to take a bunch of actions. If you see an opponent just sitting there passing, it likely means they have some kind of answer for Sabine, whether that be direct removal like a takedown or a forced choke, or an exhaust effect like No Good to Me Dead. So you may not want to rely on the Darksaber in that type of scenario where Sabine seems threatened. Personally, I don't really like this card, I'll be real with you. I know some people are very up on it, and I do think you can sort of run away with the game if you get to equip the Darksaber and just go nuts. But I think it's risky. I don't like to play this sort of high risk, high reward thing. I'm not saying it's bad. It doesn't really fit with the way that I most like to play, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. There are absolutely games that you just run away with thanks to the Darksaber. So I would say if that's a kind of your style of thing, you can definitely include it, but just be aware of those risks before using it. The decks that I'm going to show here don't have the Darksaber, but you could easily get a Darksaber into these different sorts of builds and take a look at whether you like that version better. And it's possible that as I do more testing and play around with different stuff, I'll end up deciding, hey, the Darksaber was a good idea after all, I'm going back to it. We'll have to see. For now, I'm not running it, but I could easily see people deciding to do so. All right. So yeah, that's the Darksaber, and then now we're going to take a look at the first of these decks. This is a updated yellow Sabine build. So I have jokingly titled this Live for the Swarm, which was a voice line from StarCraft. And this deck is pretty low to the ground. In fact, I have a very large number of 1 and 2 cost units. So 3 Spec Force Soldiers, 3 R2s, 3 Cartel Turncoats, 3 Leia Organa Defiant Princess, who can be a 1 cost unit, and then 12 2 cost units on top of that. This deck is really going for the multiple small units playstyle. It doesn't have anything above 4. And the idea is basically just that you're overwhelming people with a bunch of smaller units and using that to gain an advantage. And this leans into the Cartel Turncoat, which I think is a quite good card for yellow Sabine. And you have L3 as another relevant small unit, and then some of the cards that we were discussing earlier with Daring Raid and Cassian Andor. This deck is also running the Hotshot Deal 44 Blaster, which is a very strong card. I've had some pretty good results with this. I think it might be a little more one-dimensional compared to some other Sabine compositions, so I'm not entirely sure that this is the way that I would like to go, but it does have some advantages. It has a big threat in space as well as on the ground, and the large number of small units is very effective against single target removal, which is not efficient against people playing multiple small units. Single target removal tends to be best if you're trying to curve out and play increasingly large units each turn. Single target removal keeps pace with that well. Doesn't do as well when you're playing a bunch of small stuff. So that's kind of the idea behind this deck. And some key cards for yellow: Cartel Turncoat, which I already mentioned. 1 cost, 2/3 in space. It does have a built-in bounty that allows your opponent to draw a card, but in exchange you get a 2/3 for 1, which is pretty good. Alliance X-Wing is a 2/3 for 2. So the Cartel Turncoat, in exchange for that bounty and for not being a rebel, costs 1 less and potentially allows you to play multiple units on the first turn. Hotshot Deal 44 Blaster, great card. So you can either play it for 1 as just an upgrade that gives +2 power on a non-vehicle unit, or you can smuggle it out for 3, and when played using smuggle, attack with the attached unit, which makes it kind of a mini surprise strike that doesn't cost a card. Overall, I think this card's really good. L337 Droid Revolutionary is a 2-cost 2/2. When played, you may rescue a captured card. If you don't, give a shield token to this unit. So 2 for a 2/2 shielded that has heroic is quite good. She also has smuggle that allows you to play her for 4, and she has that rescue ability. I was incredibly excited about this card at first. I will say capture has been rarer than I was expecting, which makes her a little less strong than I was first thinking, but I still think she's a really good option just because 2 for a 2/2 shielded is already quite strong. And then the added bonus when you do run up against someone that's playing, that's playing those capture effects can be quite nice. So now we're going to take a look at the green Sabine build that I've been messing around with. So this is using Energy Conversion Lab, and we've included, so this has a lot of the old Rebel package. The previous yellow build didn't have as much of it because some of the new units are not Rebels. But for this one, we're still running, Medal Ceremony, Fleet Lieutenant, Wing Leader, that sort of thing. The big addition is Daring Raid, Poe, and Wrecker. So Poe and Wrecker are really, so Daring Raid and Cassian are basically going to be in all these decks. They're really good. Poe and Wrecker are both really, really strong options if you can ambush them. Wrecker is also quite strong even if you don't. Poe is a little less good if you don't ambush him. But yeah, these are the key cards. I highlight 3 for the other 2, but just these 2 for green. These 2 cards go so well with Energy Conversion Lab to give you more of a top-end option that I think they've really, in my view, at least revitalized green. I personally did not feel green was in the best spot going into Shadows of the Galaxy, but I think these 2 cards and their synergy with Energy Conversion Lab might be enough to make it the best Sabine again. I'm not entirely sure, but even though these guys are aggression, I'm not actually running them in the other Sabine builds because they do much worse without the ambush, and those builds are playing lower to the ground. But with these cards, green can afford to be a little bit more mid-rangey. It doesn't have to be as aggressive because you do have some really good answers in the kind of mid-game and going towards the late game with Poe and Wrecker both potentially doing huge damage. Poe basically straightforwardly replaces the... So previously, Steadfast Battalion was used in kind of a similar role where it was a 5-cost unit that you could ambush with ECL to defeat an enemy leader in 1 hit. Poe also does that and more. So Poe is a really good unit in the right situation. Wrecker can also be really good. I think I have seen some builds that are even running Timely Intervention to potentially do more ambushes with them. I'm not a huge fan about that because I'm not sure I want to resource that far, but it is an option that you could run. And I think these are quite cool cards, if you ask me, and big reasons to play green. Now we're going to look at the double red version. This is a non for a cause I believe in deck. So this is a deck that incorporates a fair number of non-heroic cards, and as a result it's not playing for a cause I believe in, but at the same time it's still playing more burn cards than the others and has the ability to run aggression. You got Saw Gerrera in the sideboard. There's some nice options in this build, and I quite like it. I think that the Gray Squadron Y-Wing, also with its indirect damage, where the opponent gets to choose where the damage goes, is a lot more effective if you're running Tarkin Town, and this deck is running Tarkin Town, making that an interesting option as well. So some key cards for double red in particular: Bo-Katan Kryze, fighting for Mandalore, 2-cost double red ground unit, 3/3. When defeated, for each player with 15 or more damage on their base, draw a card. This is arguably the best 2-drop in the game. 2 for a 3/3 with major upside and no downside. Really good. The main downside is that she's double red, but if you're double red, you get to play her. So basically, early on, she's basically just a Battlefield Marine, and Battlefield Marine's really good. And then later on in the game, that when defeated ability can potentially get you some cards. So playing her later on, even if she's going to be removed, can potentially help you with card advantage overall. And I think she is quite strong. Chaos of War is a new burn card, a 3-cost event where it deals damage to each player's base equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. So you can play this, in theory, if the opponent has 10 cards in hand, you can play this to deal 10 damage. Now, it is double-edged, as it also hits you, and it is sometimes going to be weaker than For a Cause I Believe In would normally be if you're in a situation where your opponent only has 1 or 2 cards in hand. So that is worth considering, and I do think this is a weaker card than For a Cause I Believe In, but in a deck that isn't running a ton of heroism stuff, it becomes, perhaps a stronger option. This deck is also running the Reckless Gunslinger, which I think is really cool. That's a 1-cost 2/1 when played, deal 1 damage to each base, and you can smuggle it out for 3, which means that you can potentially put it in the resource zone if you have a better starting play, and then play it later on for 3 and still do that direct damage, and it doesn't cost a card. So overall, just adding some more burn options to the deck and letting you put damage on your opponent's base directly, which I at least think is a pretty strong thing to do. Damaging your opponent's base directly is one of Sabine's key strengths, and I think that this double red version is more able to do that perhaps than some of the others, thanks to cards like that Reckless Gunslinger. Okay, so then here are some other new cards that didn't make it into these specific decks, but I do think are worth considering. So on the left, we have Ketsu Onyo, Old Friend. She's a 2-cost aggression heroism unit, and she is a 3/2 with the Mandalorian, Underworld, and Bounty Hunter traits. She has Saboteur, and when this unit deals combat damage to a base, you may defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less. The really cool thing about Ketsu Onyo is that if your opponent, let's say your opponent leads off with a shielded unit, Ketsu Onyo can potentially attack the shielded unit and trade with it, but you could also attack the enemy base, deal 3 damage to it, and remove the shield, and then they have to attack into you. It likely still ends up being a trade, and you got that damage to the base as well. Ketsu can also be quite effective against things like the experience tokens that Rey gives to units, and any bounty cards that your opponent might play on your units in the early game. So for instance, if the opponent is going to try and play Price on Your Head, in order to ramp, sometimes people play that on the first turn, just on their opponent's first play, and then they remove it on the second turn. If you play Ketsu Onyo, your opponent plays Price on Your Head, you can attack the enemy base and remove the Price on Your Head. So it gives you some nice protection against stuff like that. The main downside that I have with this card is just that 3/2 is not a stat line that I really like. There are too many things that take it out, including Daring Raid that I mentioned earlier, but I have had some good results with this actually in a Bo-Katan deck. Now, to be fair, Bo-Katan has Mandalorian synergy that might make Ketsu Onyo substantially stronger, but I do think that sometimes that conditional upgrade removal and the fact that you're a 3/2 Saboteur can pay off in a positive way. Next, we have the Mercenary Gunship, a 2-cost 3/2 space unit. As an action, spend 4 to take control of this unit. Any player may use this ability. This is basically a downside because your opponent can steal the unit from you, though you could then potentially steal it back. The main reason this is appealing is that it's an aggressive space unit. I think that one key thing that Sabine can do is put pressure on both space and ground. Not all decks can do this, and the ability to arena dodge by going to the arena that your opponent didn't go to is, I think, a pretty key tactic. The Mercenary Gunship is potentially another aggressive early game unit that you can add to your list. I think that I want to test more with this card in the future, and I think it could be quite good. Now, it doesn't work with For a Cause I Believe In, and it doesn't work with Rebel Synergy cards. Those are major downsides, and I think there is a significant argument that you should not run it for that reason. Additionally, there are perhaps going to be some situations where your opponent can steal it, or where it makes your plays awkward to prevent the opponent from potentially stealing it. But At the same time, I think it is a card that has potential and is worth doing more testing on. And then last but not least, here we have the Valiant Assault Ship. This is a 4-cost Aggression Heroism space unit. It is a 3/4 with Saboteur, and on attack, if the defending player controls more resources than you, this unit gets +2 power for the attack. So 4 for a 3/4 Saboteur in space is like, okay, it's not great, but it's not terrible. And then the on-attack ability turning into essentially a 5/4 is really adding something to this card in my view, because Sabine, I often stop resourcing at 4 to 6 resources, or pause resourcing at least for a turn, depending on what's in hand. And if the opponent kept resourcing, or if they ramped and have more resources than you, this suddenly becomes substantially more powerful on the attack and scarier for your opponent. Additionally, there are some Space Sentinels that are seeing play that are able to be annoying to a lot of the space cards, but this one can just sort of go past it and keep hitting potentially for 5 damage per hit, which is difficult for your opponent to deal with. You know, if your opponent plays Conquered Dawn Interceptors, for instance, which is I think a 1/4 Sentinel in space that becomes a 3/4 on the defense, and you play the Valiant Assault Ship, you can just be like, okay, I'm just going to sneak past you every time, and you can't really attack into me because your stats are really bad when attacking. You're relying on me attacking into you, and I'm not going to do it. So Valiant Assault Ship can be cool in that role. Not currently in a bunch of my lists. It is another 4-cost thing, and I like to keep the cost curve low, but I do think that it might be a good solution if we see things like Conquered Dawn Interceptors becoming very common. One other card that I want to highlight that doesn't have a place in this presentation is Wolf. I think Wolf has become much stronger, so he was already a counter healing card. You'd mostly see him used against like Krennic or something. Ray has so much healing that I think Wolf is getting increasingly important to have in the sideboard. I already had him in the sideboard, but I think it's even more important now because the aggression Ray decks are, I think, going to be a major presence in the meta. We'll have to see for sure. Don't quite know where it will pan out, but those decks have a lot of healing, and having some counters to that might be very appreciated. Okay, that's going to about do it for this one, guys. I'm curious what you think. Do you which color of Sabine do you like best? Do you think that my builds are crazy? Do you think that everyone should be playing the Dark Saber? You know, what do you think? But those are some of my initial thoughts about updating Sabine for Shadows of the Galaxy, and I'm curious to see what you guys think as well. Thanks to y'all for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.